Coming up on this week's show, a new easy way to make NES games.
Why Sony had doubts about the PlayStation.
And we catch up with gaming music legend Allister Brimble.
And the Retro Hour podcast is brought to you each and every Friday with our incredible mates at Bitmap Books. Now, maybe people are asking, what do you want for Christmas? Have you seen their book, Commodore Amiga, A Visual Compendium? Now, this celebrates all aspects of Amiga gaming, from the early titles like Defender of the Crown and Barbarian through all the games that we remember playing, including Populous, Cannon Fodder, Speedball, Worms, of course, in there as well, and covering more than 140 of the biggest Amiga games, spreading over 420 pages. This is a real love letter to the Amiga. You can check it out and the rest of their retro gaming collection at bitmapbooks.com. Hello and welcome to the Retro Hour podcast, episode number 458, your weekly dose of retro gaming and technology news with me, Dan Wood.
Me, Ravi Abbott.
And me, Joe Fox.
And a very warm welcome to the show. The podcast that every single Friday celebrates everything about the golden age of classic video games, classic consoles, old computers, bringing back those incredible memories from back in the day, and of course, bringing it up to speed on all the big happenings in the world of retro from over the last 7 days, and welcoming on more veterans of the industry onto the podcast for a chat every single Friday. And we've actually reached our final normal podcast of 2024. Before we go into our Christmas specials. Anyone else feel like this has just completely snuck up and like punched us in the face out of nowhere?
I can't believe it's Christmas this month. Like, I feel like it was only the other day I was like complaining to my missus. We were in the supermarket and I was like, why is there so much Christmas stuff up? It's not even been Halloween yet. And then I blinked and it's December. Yep. And then when you said, oh, next week we need to do the Christmas quiz and the best of episode, I was like, but we've got weeks until Christmas. What are you on about? And then I checked and I was like, oh yeah, he's right. So that is definitely 100% creeped up on me massively.
Yes, I mean, if you're not familiar with what we do over Christmas, basically we swap the format up, don't we, for the final couple of shows of the year. So next week is going to be a bit of a reflection and a look back on our favourite moments of 2024, some of the best bits of guests that we've had on the podcast over the last year. And then the week after is, I think it's fair to say, definitely our favourite bit of Christmas, isn't it? When we all get together and do the annual Retro Hour Christmas Super Quiz. You excited, Ravi?
You know, every week we have a guest on and we research the questions and we thoroughly kind of, look at their history and their background and get details on it. The quiz is the only thing that I don't research and I don't prepare for it at all. And you can probably tell. And I'm going to keep it that way. I know you guys have been swatting for months.
I don't.
Just knowledge, Ravi. You know what it is? I do get what you're saying, because often, if you're watching the chase on TV, you'll shout all the answers. But God, it's so easy. If I went on there, I could do that. But I imagine when you're there in the studio, pressure's on, your mind just kind of goes blank. Because sometimes, we do that on the quiz. I'll get a question wrong, or one of you guys will. I'll listen back to it. I'll be like, how the hell did we get that wrong? When the pressure's on, it's different.
It's the pressure, isn't it? It's the pressure.
Excuses for him now, Joe.
Dan used to have all these sound effects as well and make it sound like, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? And that even
really put the tension on,
Yeah.
So that is coming up in a couple of weeks' time. We have got the amazing Slopes of Slopes Game Room on YouTube, who is going to be our quiz master this year. He was on my team last year, and I think we won, just saying. And then me and Joe are going to be hooking him on a team. Ravi's going to be bringing on a special guest. We've got Paul and Ollie coming back as well. So plenty of shouting out at the car stereo. We did actually get a comment the other day. I think it was on our Discord, someone saying that they mainly listen to the podcast for the interviews, and they've skipped a few of the Christmas quizzes before, thinking, oh, it's not for me. Then they finally listened to one and said, got completely hooked on it. And again, we're just listening in the car and screaming out the answers. So plenty of that.
Everybody loves a quiz. You turn up to a pub and there's a pub quiz going on, you've got to get involved.
So we always look forward to that. So that's coming up in a couple of weeks' time. Then we take a week off between Christmas and New Year before 2025 kicks in. But actually, this is a nice way to end 2024, I think, because today we're going to be going right back to the start and catching up with someone who was there right on day one of this podcast, because he was our first ever guest.
Yeah, in January 2016. Can you believe it? In a totally different world to the world we live in now. And this is Allister Brimble. And when we very first started this podcast, I think, Joe, when did you join us on episode 3?
Oh, God, it was episode 3 or 4. I think
Yeah,
it was my first episode.
I remember you came in on the early days, and it did start with me and Dan in Amsterdam. And one of the first interviews I conducted in Amsterdam was with one of my heroes, which was Allister Brimble. I was like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm actually talking to Allister Brimble, because so many games that I played, Allister did the soundtrack of, and they were the particular standout games that sounded absolutely awesome and amazing, because he did stuff like some amazing drum effects on there as well, and he really knew what he was doing with sound, especially on the Amiga, and then later on to other titles, going on to the PlayStation, the Game Boy. He's doing console stuff as well, but also Driver, which is one of my favourite kind of video game soundtracks of all time, but also RollerCoaster Tycoon as well.
Yeah, no, I remember Allister, when I first discovered him, was on Team 17's games. Did the music for the Alien Breed series, Super Frog on the Amiga as well. Project X, which is actually, it's a really hard shoot-'em-up game. The Team 17 released. Yeah, but that's actually just about to get a re-release. And Allister has done the soundtrack for the new version of it as well, kind of remixing the work that he did back in the 90s. And like you said, he worked on so many different platforms. And, I remember his Amiga stuff, Body Blows as well. That was fantastic. Worked on several titles for Codemasters back in the day, including a few of the Dizzy titles. Rockstar Ate My Hamster. It was a bit of a controversial game, bit of an adult game that Codemasters released back then.
Joe's favourite game as well, Power Wash Simulator.
Yes.
Why do you guys always say that to me?
where
yes, I did play Power Wash Simulator when it came out.
I remember Joe telling us that, didn't you have a power washer in the garden and your missus wanted the wall cleaning, but you're inside playing that instead? And she's like, well, we've got a real one out there.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. You're not far away from the truth there.
Allister actually had to buy a power washer and sample it and power wash things 4 times to get all the different sound effects. So he's going around power washing loads of different material and stuff. So there's interesting history with that as well.
Yeah, there's so much goes into it that you don't think about. And then he's actually done some indie games in recent years, including he actually did the soundtrack for a new Amiga game back in the summer called The Mysterious Cassette. So we talk about what it's like, 30 years later, kind of making games for the Amiga, making music on Amiga games again, and how he approached it and how he improved the original process that he had. And of course, loads of nostalgia about those early days as well. So, because when we first started this podcast, we were quite rigid to sticking to an hour, hence the names.
Yes,
I think.
And also, I think our interviewing style, when we first started it, I was like, hello, you are listening to... I was really stunted, and Dan kind of helped me relax a bit more and be more confident on the mic. But
we're both a bit right behind the ears.
You're a radio professional, but you listen to the first couple of episodes and it's really dry. It's hello, and Joe's there hi, shaking.
Well, when we had Allister on, that first interview was only 20 minutes.
Yeah, 20 minutes.
Come on.
Yeah, there's so much you can talk to.
We give him the full 1 hour treatment on this week's podcast, a little bit over an hour actually. So catching up with Allister Brimble, obviously 10 years on, there's plenty more to talk about as well, and exploring those early days in a bit more detail than we did first time around. Our special guest, Allister Brimble, he's coming up on the podcast in around half an hour from now. But of course, the way the podcast works, first 30 minutes or so is when us D-pad dynamos get together and chat about what's been happening, what's been making our social timelines, what have been the headlines over the last 7 days. And it's always nice to see new, easy ways of making games for classic consoles. Because about you guys, when I was a kid, I did try some basic programming, but really how they made console games was all a bit of a dark art, a bit of a magical mystery to me. I had no idea how you go about making an NES game, but the fact that today you can do it so easily from home kind of blows my mind.
I made some really rubbish Flash games, and I was always kind of I want to make a video game, and I'd always look up stuff like Amos and Blitz Basic, and I'd do some of those early stuff. And later, Arcade Shoot 'em Up Construction Kit, I think that's what it was called.
Yeah, I made a game in that. Dreadful it was.
And I think nowadays it's a lot easier, but also it's a lot easier to make retro games as well. And one system that we've been covering is GB Studio as well. And we've had so many like developers of indie titles as well that have said we've used GB Studio. And looking at it looks great from what you can do, you know, with the interfaces. I'm thinking of actually having a play around with this, and maybe that game that I tried to make on Flash years ago can actually come into existence, because you know, it's got like everything built in pretty much. You can like do parallax on it, all the effects. You can create music as well, and build and output the ROMs for it. But it's changed, hasn't it, Joe? So
the great thing about this is, I mean, that you didn't mention there, is it is literally a drag and drop retro game creator, isn't it? So it's not like back in the day when, you know, you and I were trying to figure out like Amos and DevPack. This is literally point and click, drag and drop.
Yeah.
So what's the news about this?
So the reason we're talking about this is, as Ravi's just mentioned there, lots and lots of developers have been using this to make Game Boy and Game Boy Color games over the last year or two. There's just been so many done on it, even like the McDonald's games, you know, that came out earlier this year. But the reason we're talking now about this is it has been, I'd say hacked, yeah. It's been heavily hacked to become a NES builder. So it's now the BB Studio, they're calling it, which stands for Big Brother Studio, because the NES was the big brother of the Game Boy. And in terms of like the hacking and stuff like that, I have no idea how they've kind of done this, but it allows you to run NES games in this, which you can then dump onto an EverDrive and play on your NES. But it has to be a particular type of EverDrive, is my understanding.
The N8 Pro.
Yeah, for it to actually run on your NES. But once again, the reason this is exciting and it's cool is it's the drag and drop capabilities of it. And obviously, I imagine, like I say, I'm no hardware guy, but you know, the Game Boy and the Game Boy Color, graphically, obviously the Game Boy Color isn't a million miles away from what the NES was doing. So I guess that's kind of like the logic behind it, you know, get it hacked and then see if it'll run on the NES. And there's a few demos out there already, you know, only like a couple of levels and stuff like that, but it looks smooth, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, it's open source. So basically, GB Studio, they've created their own fork. They forked off, which... yeah,
careful.
They've created their own fork, and that is now focused on the NES and that area. And it also means, you know, that's going to be an entirely different program. So it's probably limited at this time because it's an early version. They may be opening it up and, you know, adding stuff, updating to that, and growing it as an individual platform.
Yeah, I mean, there are a few limitations, like you said, with it being an early build of this. You know, obviously you've got more screen space than you would have on a Game Boy Color, which obviously can change the games quite a bit. So the good thing about this is, from what I've seen, basically you can build the same game and have it running on the Game Boy Color and on the NES as well. So it doesn't mean any games that you've already made. Obviously, they're going to require some tweaking because of the different screen resolution, and obviously playing it on a big TV as opposed to a handheld, and there are different palettes between the NES and the Game Boy Color. But yeah, I mean, really, the exciting news is the ease of which people were making games on the Game Boy now looks possible on the NES. So I'm interested to see kind of what's going to come out of this, because I mean, we've covered quite a few of these GB Studio games on the podcast over the last year or two, haven't we?
And it looks like it's a really good development environment. And I could imagine if one day, crazy in the future, in 10 years' time or something, maybe it's impossible, but having it compiling out to like everything, so you could, you know, just create one game in this platform and then go, right, NES version, here's the Game Boy ROM, here's the Mega Drive version, you know, all just like compiled in different ways, and doing it so they fit and hit those kind of platforms.
Just proving how easy it is to use as well. Matt Hewson is one of the developers on this. He's actually put a little video up on Blue Sky of showing a little game demo that he knocked up on his lunch break, and actually it's pretty good. So I think, I don't get too ahead of myself, but maybe even we can make a game.
Retro Hour game coming to you.
So if you want to check that out, that is available now at version 1.0 on GitHub. I'll link that in this week's show notes. Now, this is more sad news, and this is something that we were covering on the show back in the summer, I think it was. Yeah. Although the headline on Time Extension is, to the shock of absolutely nobody, Sega is trying to shut down the Super Sega FPGA project. Now, I am surprised that Sega are going down this route because, I mean, obviously, if it was Nintendo, there'd be no surprise. We know Sega have had a few of these kind of instances, but it does seem like these are becoming a lot more regular now with their Sega closing down fan projects and unauthorized things that are happening on the retro scene, which they didn't used to be like this, so there's definitely change in the water at Sega.
I think Sega have looked at what Atari have been doing over the last couple of years, and they're just kind of like, okay, legacy, that's where the money is. And obviously, what was it, a couple of years ago, they did like what mini console do you want to see from Sega next? And everybody was like voting for the Dreamcast. And then obviously they've got all their remakes in the pipeline. They've got the Crazy Taxi like open world game. Recently showed off some footage of the new Shinobi game, which looks wicked. Streets of Rage remake, Golden Axe remake. You know, there's all sorts of legacy stuff from Sega in the pipeline. Obviously, they've announced they're delisting a lot of original Mega Drive titles from, you know, digital storefronts and stuff like that. So there's definitely a lot going on and stuff that I don't think we're aware of what is coming from Sega, you know, probably in the next year or so. And I think because of that, they're trying to shut a lot of this stuff down because they're like, well, we're going to be releasing our own product, whatever that product might be. And obviously we want to make as much money as possible. So obviously the Super Sega is designed to play, what is it, Master System, Mega Drive, Sega Saturn, and Dreamcast and SG-1000 games all in one place.
FPGA-based system, yeah.
It's quite long, isn't it? It's like you can put
massive.
like 3 different carts in there, and it's like a long slab. And we were like, this looks mad and a bit unusual when we first saw it as well. But it was an interesting concept, you know, being able to play all of those games. Yeah.
And you know what? I've seen a bit of a backlash online recently because there have been people that have kind of been annoyed at the Super Sega team because they haven't been showing off many details about it, and some people got a bit, you know, bit of a skeptic about whether it's a real thing or whether it's a stunt, you know, to try and rip people off. But it turns out that, yeah, Sega have come along and basically hit them with a, you know, cease and desist and said that they're demanding that the name can't be used and all prototypes and units have to be destroyed. And they've actually closed down the website too.
Yeah, so the creator of this has said that he's going to start a Kickstarter, but he's going to proceed with it. He's still going to do it. And you know, if a Sega tries to shut that down as well, he's going to demand all the costs that have been put in to be like fully paid for by Sega, which that's not going to happen.
I can't imagine that flying on Kickstarter. If Sega came along and demanded that got taken down, it'd be down.
Yeah.
So looking at it, it's a Spanish team that have kind of developed this as well, but they're doing a mix of pre-orders and then Kickstarter on top, and it looks like some of the pre-orders. I don't know if it says it's a communication issue or something like that, but yeah, according to Slopes as well, Game Room, you know, they've been charged fully for it on you know, one big card payment at the very beginning.
Some people have paid €420 for pre-orders.
Yeah, so we're gonna have to see how this develops, and yeah, but I've always thought the Super Sega name would definitely land them in something, and I thought it was a bit of a placeholder at first. I thought they'd put it in and then they make a kind of sensible decision and somehow kind of flip it round. Yeah,
I know what you're saying.
What's Sega going to do about this?
Yeah, but it seems like
what are they going to do? Who do they think they are?
Going to like really highlight it to Sega, isn't it? You know, and then go, oh, maybe we won't leave them alone. You know, yeah.
Yeah, you're right. I think it does sound like it's an official Sega endorsed product, doesn't it? Having Sega in the title. So I imagine that was kind of a red rag to a bull. But also, I mean, some people have announced, you know, a bit of concern that maybe Sega are going to start going after other FPGA systems that have got like Sega, like Mega Drive cores and that kind of thing. They're going to start getting annoyed about, you know, Misters having Mega Drive cores and and other systems. So it is a bit of a...
Well, this is like, even just looking at the word Super Sega, it's in like the Sega blue, you know, and it's, I don't see them going after Mister and stuff, because I reckon that would really, like, you know, highlight kind of a bit of a bad culture there. Like, you know, Nintendo, they stand out a lot with how they go around and, you know, threaten a lot of people legally, but I don't think they've gone after Nintendo calls on the Mister, have they? Or even gone that far, you know?
No, I mean, it's it's definitely, emulation's always been a kind of mysterious world, hasn't it? And I mean, you know, 10 years ago they were fine with ROMs being left up everywhere, so it can change, you know, as time goes on. But yeah, it's I think you're right, Ravi. I think just having that Sega name in there was probably the thing that
In blue.
triggered their lawyers.
And the box artwork has that classic like 90s like Sega
trademark
They've
kind of
even
look.
got like the grid,
the
in
grid,
kind of background.
the grid in the black,
so- In hindsight, probably wasn't the smartest decision in terms of branding, but and the idea's cool though. I mean, it would have been nice to see something like that on the market.
Yeah, and they seem to be putting videos out at the moment of it playing Crazy Taxi and stuff like that as well.
Maybe something will eventually come out, you know, that maybe doesn't bear the Sega branding. So we'll keep an eye on that as we head into 2025. And if you have pledged money for it already, fingers crossed you get it back. Now, speaking of Sega, this is quite funny. This is a new beat-em-up game, which I imagine instantly got Joe's attention. A beat-em-up game for the Mega Drive. And this is about a street fighting YouTuber.
Yeah, but maybe it's of the times, maybe. So this is a Kirito, I believe is how you say it.
Because everybody wants to be an influencer, is that what you're saying?
Well, yeah, and the Mike Tyson fight and all that jazz the other week. So this is Kirito, the game, which is going to be for Mega Drive, which, mate, that's the punchline there, you know, that's the concept of the game. It's a classic side-along belt-scrolling beat-em-up, but it is starring he's a retro gaming YouTuber, and I believe the story is that his like idol influencers in YouTubers, I think they beat him up and steal his collection, and he's getting revenge on them, which, you know, I'm like, okay, that sounds a bit like interesting. And then I watched the trailer of it and I was like, yeah, that looks all right. Like, it's very akin to, I don't know if you guys are familiar, but it really reminded me of Maximum Carnage for the Mega Drive graphically.
It reminded me of The Simpsons arcade.
Yes, I see that as well. And I also see a little bit of Scott Pilgrim versus the World beat 'em up, which came out a while ago graphically. And I like the look of it. It looks cool, like really nice and bright, you know, graphics and nice big sprites. Looks like you can have a lot of enemies on the platform as well, on the screen there and stuff. And even some of the boss fights, it actually turns into a one-on-one fighter, so akin to Street Fighter. So I'm like, oh, okay, we'll see how this is doing. It went up on Kickstarter 2 days ago, 60 days on there, and within the day, it hit its goal of £20,000.
Yeah,
which is,
there's a demand for Mega Drive beat 'em ups, isn't there? It's like,
there's definitely a demand for it. It's crazy. So yeah, this does look wicked. It's going to set you back €12, for a digital version of the game, which I love. They've called the dematerialized version. I love that.
Nice.
I think that's wicked. And then if you want, you know, the hard copy with box and manual and everything, you can pick if you have a European version, American version, or the Japanese version. It's going to set you back €59. So that's pretty good. You know, some of these games, sometimes they come out and they just absolutely skyrocket in price. You know, if you want to get them in the aftermarket, you're looking at like £200-300. So definitely one to consider. But
and to be fair, you think back in the day, you know, Mega Drive games were about £50 in the shops.
Yeah,
anyway,
exactly.
So, yeah.
And you know what? Funny enough, I was at a games market this weekend, just gone, and everybody's going on about how like Mega Drive games are just becoming more and more expensive. Even the sports games are like a tenner now. You know, that nobody wants, but everybody's having to buy them to get their collections up and stuff. So yeah, looking forward to this one. It looks fun. Not too sure, other than the story and the graphics, what it brings, you know, in terms of gameplay, what's new kind of thing. There's not.
It doesn't look like anything's new, Joe. It looks like just the standard beat 'em up, but it looks awesome. Does it need to be new? It's just
you can download
the thing.
You can download the ROM demo as well.
Yeah, there is a demo.
Kickstarter, yeah. So I think that might have influenced some people. I haven't played it myself.
That's
but
good.
If it does play well, that might have made people want to back it straight away.
Influence the influencers.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's the only thing that I thought may have put people off, that you play as an influencer, but doesn't seem
Seems to have worked.
Yeah, so it's something different, isn't it? That's what it brings new.
When you originally mentioned it, I thought it was about a guy who was like streaming his fights on YouTube.
That's all right. I thought it was someone beating up YouTubers. I was getting nervous.
And then he gets banned halfway through the game.
So that is up and running on Kickstarter now. If you want a new, what did you call it? A belt scrolling beat 'em up.
Belt scrolling beat 'em ups. Yeah, man.
For the Mega Drive in 2025, and you can get the demo to play over the Christmas break. I'll link that up and the rest of the stories in this week's show notes. Now we've got some more stories to talk about in just a minute, including some news we've had this week that proves that maybe Sony weren't all that optimistic about the PlayStation in its early days on the week that we celebrate the PlayStation's 30th birthday. Is this week, isn't it? So we'll talk about that in just a minute. And also a game that you might want to play on your Switch if you're into retro racing games in just a second. Before we do that, let's just take a sec to give a massive thank you to someone who's been a huge supporter of this podcast all throughout 2024, and that is our wonderful mates at Shopify. You know them? They're the ones with this sound, which is the sound of making money. And actually, we've got some of our books available at theretrohour.com. If you buy one of our books, which you can get physically, hardback edition, or a digital download, that is powered by Shopify. You set this up, Ravi.
Yeah, and it was super easy sorting out all the postage. It can calculate it for you, ship to multiple regions as well. You can also do print-on-demand services. It does physical and digital delivery as well.
Yeah, it's even been printing out your little labels for you as well, calculating all your shipping, all the stuff we had to do by hand when we did our initial Kickstarter that nearly killed poor Joe. So Shopify does all that for you. So if you may be thinking of starting a side hustle in 2025 or maybe becoming your own boss, Shopify is the all-in-one commerce platform to start, run and grow your business. And it's revolutionizing millions of businesses all around the world. And the great thing is, even if you sell in person as well, they've even got those amazing shop-ready point-of-sale systems. So, you can sell at trade shows. People tap it because no one carries money anymore. And even gets you selling across your social media marketplaces, Facebook, Instagram and TikTok. And of course, that incredible e-commerce platform full of industry-leading tools ready to ignite your growth. Great thing is as well, you don't have to learn any new skills. No design, no coding. You do the bit of your business that you enjoy doing and let Shopify take care of the rest and support you every step of the way. So it's time to get serious about selling. Why don't you give Shopify a try today? And if you use our link, you can try out Shopify for just £1 a month. So head to shopify.co.uk/retro hour. That's all lowercase. I'll put it in the show notes. Try it out for just £1 a month. No brainer. Shopify.co.uk/retro hour and get ready to take your business to the next level today and hear a lot more of this. Right then now, this game looks awesome because I have been thinking, obviously Christmas break coming up. I don't very often take time off. I'm thinking of maybe having a week and a half off over Christmas this year. I kind of feel like I've earned it. Worked quite hard in 2024. And I've been looking at games to stock up on my Switch. So I'm going to go back to my mum's for a week or so. And I'm thinking of stuff that I want to play during that week. And I'm thinking this one would be a perfect download. You guys know me. Love my old school arcade racers. And this is a game that's landing on the Switch next week on the 12th of December called Victory Heat Rally.
Yeah, this is by Sky Devil Palm, and it's a little indie team, and they actually kickstarted this game at the beginning of 2024 with the target of going on to Xbox, PS4, Switch, Steam as well, and itch.io. It looks like a really cool little title as well, and 760 backers made this happen.
I really like the look of the gameplay of it. I think a lot of people's brain would go to like F-Zero and Lotus and stuff like that, but I thought Street Racer. Did you guys ever play that much?
Yeah.
That was a game I hadn't thought about in a long time. It's got that kind of like pseudo Mode 7 kind of like sort of from behind kind of graphics. and I really
it's
like
quite low down though as well, isn't it?
It is quite.
Street Racer was a bit lower where the camera angle is, and it looks like it's a bit low, which is quite cool.
Yeah, and I think that's why it reminded me of it, because like F-Zero is a little bit higher up. Lotus is quite low as well, isn't it? But graphically, yeah, it's 2D sprites which look really, really nice. Of these little like kind of like rally cars driving around these 2.5D levels, which really, really fantastically coloured, and the graphics on it are very kind of like very Japanese, very bright, very shiny.
Really pops, doesn't it?
It really pops. But what really gets me about it is the speed of the game. You know, I know you said there, Dan, that you might play this over Christmas, but I don't think you can handle this game, mate. This looks a bit too quick for you.
I need like an action replay or something to come out on the Switch so I can slow it down to half speed. In fact, racing games are one of the few genres I'm actually still all right at, Jim.
Yeah, I'll give you that. You tend to beat me on them.
It's got a banging soundtrack. It's like Dance Dance Revolution or something, or mixed with happy hardcore. It sounds like
Nice.
kind of dancing one, and also
as well.
Yeah,
that's the bit I was going to point out. Split screen, so you're playing quarters like old school style, Mario Kart style.
Looking at the wheel map as well, that really, really reminds me of Micro Machines V3.
Oh yeah,
when you go through and select like the different tracks and different areas. Yeah,
They actually won an award as well at the Indie Arena booth 2024. It won an Indie Gaming Award there, and it's been out on Steam, hasn't it, for a while? So I think the fact that it's now coming out on Switch as well feels really at home on there. And I think perfect for this time of year as well, when a lot of people are, I don't know about you guys, like I said, they go visit my mum and my brother and my nephew. It's always a Switch, it's in my bag. So, hook up to the telly, local multiplayer over Christmas. Should be a good laugh.
Yeah, there was a good one, Horizon Chase Turbo, before with music by Barry Leach, and that kind of reminds me of this, but this looks like more... That was quite comical, but this looks more like a kind of a comic book version of this. More kind of fun and cutesy and a bit crazier.
Yeah, so when you get hold of this, it's going to be, it's in dollars at the moment, $24.99. Usually translates about the same in pounds on the e-stores, unfortunately. But I think, not a bad price for a game. It looks like there's quite a lot in this. I've heard there's about 55 different levels or something in this, so it looks quite in depth, different courses. So if you want to get hold of that, a good retro style racer with of course some great local split screen co-op, perfect for the Christmas break with the family. I'll link that up in this week's show notes. Comes out on the 12th of December. Now, just one more story to talk about for everybody else. The patrons, though, they get a few extra news stories because we've done that all throughout the year because we chop the adverts out for the patrons. We don't want to give them a shorter podcast, so I've got a few extra stories coming up in just a minute. We'll tell you more about our Christmas hangout that's coming up soon as well. And of course, this month is the month that the Sony PlayStation is celebrating its 30th birthday. I did see actually last week, Sony put a new website up and detailing like a real in-depth history of the PlayStation. Looks really nice as well. You can click on the PlayStation 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and 5, and kind of get all different stats about them and sales figures and some interesting little bits of trivia about them and nice images too. And they've kind of been rolling these out around the 30th anniversary of the PlayStation.
You change the boot screen as well, so it looks like PS1. That's one thing that's kind of come up, I think, this week. That on your PS5 or whatever.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you can change the boot screens at the moment. So I think they're looking at like legacy quite a lot. I
haven't turned my PlayStation 5 on for about 3 months. Unfortunately,
you guys need to test that. Yeah, see, because I think you can do like the PS2 screen as well.
Okay, nice. Well, obviously everyone's going big on 30 years of PlayStation. Although there has been an interesting interview this week with Sean Layden, and I think might make a good guest on this podcast at some point in the future. It sounds like he's got some interesting stories. He worked for Sony during the era when they were bringing out their debut console, and he had a chat with Eurogamer, and he mentions that he was really ecstatic when he first saw the original PlayStation, as I think many people were. I mean, I remember when we had the Oliver twins on the podcast, and they were talking about, obviously at the time I think they're really deep into Super Nintendo development back then. And I think it was that one demo disc that everyone saw, that dinosaur 3D demo, that really convinced a lot of developers that, the PlayStation was the platform to back. Although there was quite a bit of skepticism in the industry. Again, with the Oliver twins, they were telling us about how they were going around different game studios when, even before the PlayStation had launched in Japan, and they were trying to, basically say to British game companies, we want to make games for this new console. People are like, well, what does Sony know about making consoles? They don't stand a chance against Sega and Nintendo. But it turns out that maybe some of the higher-ups in Sony were feeling the same way, quite shockingly.
Yeah, it's really interesting, this is, because it seems that there was like a bit of doubt, and that some people didn't want their name associated with it, the Sony name on this new device. And I think it's interesting because if you look at that time period as well, a lot of things that guests that we've previously had on, they've talked about Sony Interactive Entertainment and, Sony Computer Entertainment, how people, kind of disregarded it a bit. And if you think of Sony, they've got that legacy of, the Discman, the Walkman as well, and just some fantastic products. I used to love mini disc, even though that was a bit, dismissed. But I don't know if it was, maybe you're in a time period as well where you had like the 3DO, which was going to be a huge console and branded around everywhere, and then that kind of flopped, and then CDI as well,
Jaguar.
Yeah, and you had Philips getting involved, and other big kind of companies. So maybe they were just thinking, we're not going to make a smash, and this is going to be kind of like a failure or a flop, like the other consoles are kind of dipping our toe into an area with Sega and Nintendo, dominating.
It is quite funny to watch like old episodes of like Bad Influence, the British gaming TV show from the 90s on YouTube. And there was an era when it got to like, late 93, early 94. And obviously, in terms of general market domination, Mega Drive and Super Nintendo were like the main players still at that point. But they always had these previews of like what they called the super consoles. And gradually, week by week, they'd have like, Jaguar there, then the 3DO would join it the week after. Then next week, we're going to show the hot new console from Japan, Sega's new machine, the preview of the Sega Saturn. And then there's one where they've got all four of them laid out on the PlayStation. There's one they're like, and this one is called the PlayStation. And they kind of skirt over it a little bit to show like, a bit like an early demo of Ridge Racer on there. But really it seems like, putting it up against, because now you look back at that era and you think, well, obviously, you're going to focus more on the PlayStation. Actually, they focused a bit more on like the Sega Saturn. I think a lot of people expected that to be kind of the runaway success of that next generation.
I always just remember my dad just commenting about how, because he was a big audio guy and like TV guy, like him and my cousin always had like a competition about who had like the biggest like kind of home cinema setup, the biggest, the best. And he was always like, Sony is an audio company. Like, why are they dabbling in game consoles? What on earth are they doing? Because the Sega dominates that. Because my dad was a Sega guy through and through when it came to game consoles. And then heaven behold, the PlayStation came out, and I remember my dad was like, he got us one for Christmas and he was so excited about it, and all of a sudden it was like, oh, Sony's the best company ever existed. Like,
I had a similar kind of thing where my dad was like into Sony, but he was into it for like the video cameras and the TVs and stuff like that. So we also like, you go around someone's house and they'd have one of those Sony MIDI systems with all the separates in there, and they'd be like, this is the best bass you're gonna get, and kind of all of that stuff. But he just kind of said to me, look, it's going to be Sony, it's going to be quality. And then I was like, Dad, can I get an Amiga CD32 and can I get a SNES? And he was like, don't get that old stuff, get this new Sony thing. And I was like, oh, what's this? PlayStation. I'd seen bits about it, but then when you got it, it was just complete quality. And I think he saw that association with the brand, and them also owning CD was going to be a big thing. Them like with their Discman history of being like one of the first portable CD players. I
think for me, when I saw that Ridge Racer demo, on TV, even before I got hands-on with the system, I looked at that and I thought, wow, that's game-changing. Again, I had an Amiga 1200 at home at the time. But I think, a lot of people were, I mean, I can understand why some of the higher-ups in Sony were a bit nervous about it, because I would have said then, a lot of these consoles came along and, CD32, Jaguar, 3DO were on the market for some of them less than a year, fell by the wayside and failed to topple Sega and Nintendo. So it was a brave thing that they did. And obviously, I think, Sony had a bit of a sting in the tail after the deal fell through with Nintendo, to make a CD-based console with them. So maybe that kind of spurred them on a little bit. We're going to succeed through spite and take down Nintendo, even though it was actually Sega that took down in the end, I guess, arguably. So I can see why they were worried, but looking at Sony's own numbers, the original PlayStation sold 102.4 million units. So I think it's fair to say turned out all right in the end. So if you want to read more about that and the rest of this week's stories, I'll put them all in this week's show notes on your podcast app, or you can head to the website, click straight through from theretrohour.com. A reminder, Patrons Christmas Hangout is coming up next Sunday, 15th of December. Christmas jumpers, just saying this, boys, are compulsory, or at least one of those crap paper hats that you get out of a Christmas cracker. Might accept one of those, but it would be nice to see you there. Massive Zoom call that we do all our patrons. So good time to join our patrons community if you haven't already, theretrohour.com. And we have got a couple of extra news stories on the way just for our wonderful patrons in just a moment. Before we do that, let's take a quick second to give a quick mention to another fantastic sponsor of this podcast throughout 2024. That is our mates at ExpressVPN, because obviously privacy has been a big deal all throughout this year. And a lot of people think that if you browse with incognito mode on your computer, on your browser, that means that you are hidden and you're protected. But actually, all your online activity is still 100% visible to a ton of third parties unless you use our friends at ExpressVPN. Now, even in America, we've read this story this year that apparently internet service providers in America can watch everything that you're doing and even sell your private browsing history to third-party advertisers. But using ExpressVPN, they reroute all of their traffic through their 100% secure encrypted servers, so nobody else can see your browsing history. And we've been, supporters and users of ExpressVPN for many years. And the great thing about it is how easy it is to use on all your devices and get protected, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. I love ExpressVPN. It's really fast. And another thing is as well, you can actually get discounts if you're using, different locations sometimes with stuff online shopping, and it's not going to actually track all your shopping and advertise to you further products that you don't really need. It's really awesome, ExpressVPN. I just leave it on my computer. I have it to set on when I start up, and it connects automatically. And a lot of the time,
you don't even notice it's on, do you?
Yeah, it's just so fast. It's on. I'm like, oh, which country am I in now?
That's the thing. You can change your location. Great for like you said, online shopping and streaming services too. Fire up the app. One click, that is it, literally. You get protected, and you can get it for your phone, your laptop, tablets, even on smart TVs. Stay private on the go as well. Rated number 1 by top tech reviewer sites like CNET and The Verge as well. And actually, right now, you might still have time if you're quick to take advantage of ExpressVPN's Black Friday and Cyber Monday deals that are on right now. So if you use our exclusive link, head to expressvpn.com/retro. Normally that'll get you 3 months for free on top of a 12-month plan. Right now, it gets you 4 extra months with the 12-month plan. Or if you get the 24-month plan, you'll get 6 extra months free, completely free, of ExpressVPN. So if you've heard us talking about it throughout the year, now is absolutely the time to give it a try. So head to expressvpn.com/retro, support the podcast, and thanks to our friends at ExpressVPN for their continued support. All right, well, thank you for checking out this week's news. Next week, we're going to be taking a little trip back through the best bits of 2024 as we warm up for the Christmas quiz and the Christmas break this year as well. It's going to be starting getting festive from next Friday. And next, for our final interview on the podcast of 2024, we're going to be chatting to the legend, the guy that started it all, our first ever guest, catching up with him a decade later and going much more in depth this time, and also finding out what he's been up to over the last 9-10 years with this week's guest, Allister Brimble. He's coming up next on the Retro Hour podcast. You're listening to the Retro Hour podcast, and it's time to welcome on this week's very special guest. And today, we're kind of going back to roots and revisiting someone who was there right at the start of this podcast, because he was actually our very first guest on episode 1 back in January of 2016. We thought we'd welcome him back. It's been long overdue that we have a catch-up with the wonderful Allister Brimble. How's it going, Allister?
Yeah, God, I can't believe it's been so long. 2016.
Yeah, that is mad.
And then I think we met up recently, didn't we, in Spoleto for an Amiga event there, which was pretty cool. So I think at that point I had a chat to Dan, so I'd love to do one of these podcasts again. Memory of the one we did so long ago. So
yeah, you didn't have to ask twice. Yeah, we're like, yeah, let's get you back on. But obviously we've got, a decade of your work that you've done since then, but also being that interview was, so short on episode 1, we thought we'd kind of expand and go a bit more in depth as well, because, before we hop into the history, because there will be people that didn't hear that episode, all those years back, so we'll definitely cover some more of that in depth again. But I did see that recently you've been working on an updated version of a Team 17 classic. Project X is back, isn't it?
yes, it is. Project X Light Years, it's called. It's a reimagined version of the same game. It has backing from Team 17, although it's not being created by them specifically. And they ran a Kickstarter on it, and to get the funds to get me to do a new title theme, which I've done. You can hear that if you go to YouTube now. Just Google Project X Light Years and you'll find it. There's also a Steam demo. And it's pretty exciting. I also put them in the coder in touch with a guy called Jerome, a French artist who I worked with quite a bit over the years on sort of Game Boy games and stuff like that. And he's doing brand new graphics for it. He's a big Project X fan, and it's now looking really great.
It's awesome to see that back. For people that haven't played it, the Amiga original, I remember that being, obviously your music in the original game was just fantastic. So exciting, really matched the fast pace of the gameplay, gorgeous graphics. I remember that game being killer hard though, so difficult.
Well, what a lot of people don't know is the first version we sent out, because we sold a lot of copies, for the time, several 100,000 copies, I'd imagine. But you couldn't actually get past level 3 because it would crash. So, these days you like get a patch, you could just, easily patch it online. But back then they had to send out all the discs again. So every single floppy disk.
That must have been expensive.
It was very expensive. But anyway, it was so hard you couldn't actually get past level 3. So
wow.
Are you still going for that old school kind of rave dance sound, or are you adding in some new elements of dance into the sound?
So I took the original track, and the thing is, I've remade that track 4 times now for various albums, and so I'm kind of really bored with it. so I thought, well, I don't exactly want to do that. But I thought if I go too far away with it, then the fans of the original track aren't going to like it. So I started off like the original track, and then I went in a slightly different direction. So I've really modernized it and brought in some new sounds. I've reworked the piano part, the main piano part, to have slightly different chords, more modern chords. And we got some really modern effects in the background too, and a lot more modern beats. Yeah, it's different, but the same.
I was going to say, the original soundtrack kind of would fit in with, any old school rave or dance nightclub that you actually went in. And it had a bit of a Streets of Rage 2 feel to it as well.
Yeah, so the original one, I'd never listened to that style of music at all in my life before. I was listening to Jean-Michel Jarre at the time, and that's as far as I'd got. So somebody who worked for Team 17 in one of the Microbyte shops, which was set up by Mick Robinson, who actually created Team 17, he gave me a tape of the current sort of dance rave scene. And that's where I got all the inspiration from.
Wow.
He even sampled some sounds from it, which would not be legal today.
Let's get that. Be a good point to get into your history then, Alistair. Because, there will be people, like I said, that didn't hear that first interview, who I'm sure were, fans of the games that you worked on back in the day that might not know too much about kind of your history. So, it's always interesting to start right from the beginning with our guests. Do you remember where you first experienced a video game or a computer? Where did your kind of love of it all begin?
I think I was something like 7 years old. And back then, the games were just bat and ball games. And you had two paddles and you could move it was like a tennis game, and you could move the blobs up and down to hit the ball, which was just a square.
A pong.
Yeah, and I think I saw it on a TV program called Tomorrow's World, which was very popular at the time. And I was absolutely obsessed about getting one, and was on at my parents until they bought it for me.
What was your first kind of home machine then that you actually started using and started, doing a bit of coding on and playing with?
My first machine was a ZX Spectrum 16K, and because my parents couldn't afford the 48K. And so we played with it for a bit and realized it didn't work. So luckily, they decided to upgrade it to a 48K. So I was quite lucky there. And so it was 48K Spectrum. Started to hear bits of music on it after a while by a guy called Tim Follin. Because, the Spectrum could play one note at a time, one bleep at a time. It was really basic. Mm. And Tim Follin managed to program it to get like 6 channels out of it. I think it was his brother, Jeff, did it. And it sort of really inspired me into sort of game music. And I'd been doing piano lessons from the age of 7. So to me, like blending music with computers was perfect. And it kind of went on from there. When I sold the Spectrum, I think I got a Commodore 64. Again, loads of amazing soundtracks by Rob Hubbard and that sort of thing. And I started writing a few tunes on some software, sort of playing around with the audio, and eventually sold that and got an Amiga.
Where were you getting the information of how to create these tunes? And were you reading magazines at the time, or were there any reference books that you were looking at?
Possibly I was reading magazines and stuff, and they pointed me to some audio creation software where you could actually enter the notes and see them on the screen. That would be for Commodore 64. However, just going back to the ZX Spectrum, I think it's a bit more interesting. Well, when we got to the Spectrum 128, the music started to get quite good. And I used to slow it down. I used to record it on a tape and slow it down to work out how they'd done it. And the only way I could do it was by actually typing the notes in Sinclair Basic. So that's kind of as far as I got for a while, until I bought a program called Wham the Jukebox for the Spectrum, where I could do a bit more. I didn't do much more on the Spectrum or Commodore 64 for ages, until I got actual game work. And then, of course, I had sound drivers and that sort of thing.
Yeah, so I was going to ask about that, actually. So Commodore 64, obviously, the SID chip, legendary. I remember when we got a 64, we got the, do you remember that Music Maker keyboard? It was kind of a little overlay that went over the keys on the Commodore 64, and it came with a little program where you could basically, just like play the keyboard into it.
Yeah, I didn't have that, but I had something similar for a while. This is I actually have quite a good story for you there. I can't remember what it's called, but I did get this piece of music creation software for the Commodore 64. I think I was on about it to my friends at school, saying, oh yeah, I reckon I could do anything on this. And of course, I was a complete beginner at the time, but they challenged me to translate a piece of music by Jan Hammer onto the 64. And I was determined to do it. And after about a month, I came back to them with the piece of music playing on the 64. Ooh. So I think by that sort of thing, I was actually learning at the same time. By that point, it was time to get an Amiga and sort of push it a bit further.
So how did you first start making music on the Amiga then? Because obviously that was very different to the Spectrum and the 64 being a sample-based machine. I mean, what was kind of your approach to making music on that? And also, what was your setup? I mean, what kind of sampler did you have? Which type of Amiga? What software were you using on it initially?
Initially, the only program I had was called Aegis Sonics. It was actually pretty good because you could play samples and you could play synthesis as well. It had its own internal synthesis. So I did a lot of tunes on that. It was actually in musical notation on the screen. I sent quite a few tracks off to a company called 17-Bit Software, which at the time was a public domain software company. You know, they'd send discs out of music for the price of the disc. So yeah, sent them some tunes, and they wrote back and said they loved the tunes, and published some of them on their discs.
I wonder how you got your samples as well. Were you using those Amiga ST01 sample packs, and ones that got created later on as well?
So the way you got samples back then was to use other people's samples, which was the easiest way of doing it. You just found a tune you liked and kind of ripped the samples out and used them in your own tune. So there were obviously some people a lot more clever than me around at the time that could make their own sounds. And then, when I got past Agent Sonics, I got onto Sound Tracker, and it came with a few discs of sounds. I think they were called STO1.
Yeah, those
STO2.
are the ones. Yeah, legendary. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I started to use those. I've actually got remakes of all those sounds today that I might use in a new track at some point, just for fun. But yeah, later on, I bought my own sampler. I can't remember what it was called because it's a long time ago. Audio Engineer, probably. Something like that.
Audio Imager, was that it?
Right, possibly. But at that point, I started to buy my first ever synthesizers and drum machines. And I was starting to record my own sounds. And you'll hear in Super Frog, all the drums in that are my own sounds. Actually, the sampler went wrong, and it had a high-pitched whine on it. And I recorded the sounds anyway. If you listen carefully, you'll hear that high-pitched whine on all the Super Frog samples. But it actually made them brighter and cleaner in some ways, so it worked pretty well.
I think I remember from the first interview you mentioned that you had an Akai sampler later on, and I think you'd record them at a higher bit rate and then reduce it down to get a really nice accuracy with the drums. Yeah,
I had an Akai S950, which I've still got today actually in this room, and I had a lot of sounds on there I could sample and use. But beyond that, I bought a Kurzweil K2000, and I started to transfer the sounds direct. So I'd make the sounds on the Kurzweil and then transfer them digitally to the Amiga and just resample them how I wanted them. So I didn't lose any quality at all.
And it make them really stand out as well, their sounds.
Yeah, if you play a piece of music called Assassin that I did for Team 17, that's the first time I did that. So those sounds are made directly on the Kurzweil 2000, saved to a disc, and then transferred digitally over to the Amiga.
Did you ever? I did hear stories about certain musicians on the Amiga when you got a sampler. If you heard a drum or just an isolated sample in say a commercial dance song or something, like a pop song even, you could just kind of cue that bit up on your cassette tape recorder and then clean it up in a sample editor. Any of that kind of going on before those early days?
Only in Project X.
Right.
I think that main rave sound that you hear in it, it's I think they call it a Hoover synth.
Yeah.
That was actually recorded off a tape. Yeah. So, but after that, I think. Yes, I did do that again for Body Blows. There was a sample CD by a guy called Peter Gabriel, who's pretty big in the scene, in the music scene, and he produced a DAT tape. I actually had a DAT tape of his original sounds that I wasn't supposed to have, and took a number of the sounds from that. So, that would be used in Body Blows.
Well, I saw that one of the first commercial games you were credited on was in 1989, and it was a game called For Soccer Sims. And I know previously, like you mentioned, you were doing soundtrack for 17-Bit Software's public domain releases, but obviously Codemasters been a really well-known games company. I'm interested in how that kind of move went then from doing the public domain stuff to working with a major company like Codemasters, and what memories you've got of working on that game.
Yeah, well, I'd sent them a demo at one point, and they got back and liked what I'd done. So the biggest thing to start with was actually kind of worry over creating something they'd actually like. I got to work on it, and luckily they liked it straight off. However, I just have to say, the next game I did for them, which was Super Stuntman Simulator, I thought, oh, no problem. So I'm gonna do this, no problem. They actually came back and didn't like the track.
Right.
So at that point, I had to learn to like take feedback on board. I remember being really upset by the fact they didn't like this track, and my mum telling me, "Look, Allister, they're paying you. You just got to bloody well get on with it and just make the changes." So I did.
How did you approach making it then? I mean, did they give you much guidance, or was it basically, right, we're doing this game, it's a soccer game, make something like this? I mean, how did you kind of get to work on that, and how did you communicate with them? And was it like posting cassette tapes back and forth in the mail? How did that kind of work?
I think, it was a guy called Tim Miller there who was very good at explaining things. And he just said, just do what you've been doing for 17-bit software, but make like a match of the day type theme. So of course, I had the reference there straight off, and it wasn't too tricky to do that. So I think that particular game was quite an easy one to start with, which was good.
And did you ever get to visit Codemasters' offices then, or was it kind of all done remotely?
After I'd done that game and a couple of other Amiga games, they actually invited me to go up to do some music for the NES console. Mm. Now, this is really interesting, actually. So they got me into the office and they sat me in front of a PC running the very first version of Windows. And actually, we went into DOS, and they loaded up a text editor. And they said, Allister, write us some music. And I started looking at the screen thinking, well, there's no soundtrack on the screen or anything. What am I supposed to do? Mm. Turns out you had to type the notes in one at a time. Not only that, you had to type the note lengths in and define the instruments all in text. And so, I into the deep end or what?
You're like, let me go home and get my Amiga 500.
That's right, exactly. So in the end, I managed to do it, and I wrote some tools in the end, so I could write the music on the Amiga on a tracker, and then convert the data to the NES into their text format, and that took the stress out of it quite a bit. But yeah, it was really in at the deep end with Codemasters there. But that taught me a lot of stuff for the future. And the interesting thing is, so I'd done Amiga first for games, but after I'd done the NES stuff, they asked me to do previous formats like the ZX Spectrum and the Commodore 64 that I'd been brought up with. And I was able to use those same techniques, write it on the Amiga and convert the data over there to do that. So I did something like 12 Commodore 64 titles, along with ZX Spectrum, Amstrad, Atari ST, and all the other formats that sort of shared the same data.
That must have felt weird, did it? Because obviously you've gone from, the sample-based stuff on the Amiga then to kind of having to downgrade them to work on platforms like the Spectrum. That's not the direction most game musicians go in, I imagine. Almost a step backwards, isn't it?
It was a step backwards, but it was a step backwards to my childhood almost. Yeah. So I loved it. I'm trying to do what this kind of great composers like Rob Hubbard, Martin Galway, Ben Dalglish were doing. But I couldn't. I realised after I started it how good they were, because it's really hard to get it sounding good. And it wasn't until right at the end of the life of those machines I got it to sound good.
Well, you also worked on a Rockstar Ate My Hamster. That's a pretty interesting adult title. Like, what are your memories of that, and when you first kind of saw it?
Quite hilarious names of the characters. I think he had to change every pop star's name to a similar name. It's like Cliff Richards was Stiff Pilchards, and Michael Jackson was Wacko Jacko, and so on. So I'll tell you about how it worked. So you're a rock band, and you had to progress in the game by creating better and better music and getting more fans. So when they came to me, they said, Allister, the music at the start's got to sound absolutely rubbish. We want it to slowly get better. And obviously that's really tricky. Not only did they want it to sound rubbish, they wanted it to be random too. So in the end, we split up. We created lots of different patterns that could go together in the tracker. And when we wanted it to sound wrong, we'd choose the wrong patterns. It's random patterns. And then when we wanted it to sound right, we'd put more of the right patterns together. So yeah, it was quite an interesting one to work on musically. It's kind of the ultimate in interactive music, really, that we get in today's modern games, but we did it right back then on the Amiga.
Yeah, it's a brief you don't get very often, isn't it? Make it sound dreadful.
That's right.
And I was wondering, did that take up much space then? Because you had like lots of different blocks that you had to have on the track.
Well, no, because we only used one pattern for each part, and so we probably needed about 16 patterns in total, and then we just mix and match randomly. So yeah, the bad music wasn't made by me; it was made by the Amiga, completely randomly choosing patterns.
It's quite a smart way of doing it. I like it.
Yeah, it worked.
We also worked on the Dizzy titles. He did the music for several of the Dizzy games on various platforms, and obviously Dizzy was the jewel in the crown of Codemasters around this time. They were huge titles. I mean, what memories have you got of working on Dizzy, and what was that like, and how did you approach working on that franchise?
Well, I think first I went back to listen to what had been done already, and David Whittaker, one of my favourite composers, had actually done the music for a number of them. So it was really taking his style and translating that to the Amiga. Of course, they didn't have much memory for me to do it. It wasn't like doing a demo anymore. You know, you might have 20 kilobytes for the music available. So I wasn't able to do, as I'd done on the Team 17 games, where we had 1 megabyte of memory available for the whole game. I had a lot more space. Here it's minuscule, so ended up making a lot of small synth sounds. So a different style of music completely. The composition side, yeah, it all seemed to go pretty well, just copying that David Whittaker style.
Obviously, you're doing the public domain stuff, and a big part of kind of the PD scene on the Amiga was a demo scene as well. I'm interested, were you ever into the demo scene, and did you ever do anything in that?
Not really, unless you count 17-bit software, because we did a number of demos, actually. We did a few Rob Hubbard demos. Rico Holmes, the artist behind the Team 17 stuff, he created like a jukebox which you could select the tunes, and it was quite nice. And he also made a really nice graphic for Amiga Format magazine, which was a Sexy Robot or something like that. It was like this sexy robot from sort of Terminator inspired, and I did a piece of music for that. That was a great piece of music as well.
Thanks.
Really, really loved that one. That one stood out.
Yeah.
I think quite a lot of people share that Amiga Format demo as well.
Yeah, and I recreated that same piece of music for the Amiga Works album. So,
yeah, you're right about 17-bit having some. I think I had some of their. They did like some compilations of demos on CD-ROMs. You know, like the early days of CD-ROM that I remember loading up, and that load of mods and demos and stuff playing off those.
Yeah, but I always had this feeling. You know, demos were so amazing, but I really wanted them to translate that sort of skill into a video game. And I never really saw it, other than I think the Team 17 games made me wonder if it was possible. But I felt the same about music, is that I could do amazing stuff on a demo probably, because I had loads of space. But then I couldn't really translate that same quality to games, because you're always limited.
Was there much of a change of like approach and direction when 17-bit software ended up turning into legendary Team 17 and started producing games under that name? We did things ramp up a bit?
Yeah, so a guy called Martin Brown there, he's the main guy. He's really good at giving you guidance. So, for instance, Project X, he specified straight away, Allister, we want one of these real modern dance rave tracks that all the rage at the moment. But we also want like an old timer track for the guys that don't like that music. So we actually did both, and you could switch between them in the game. And he gave great guidance on everything, actually. I think Super Frog, he gave me some examples from Commodore 64 games, that sort of thing. Sometimes I did my own thing as well, like Alien Breed. I just did that straight off, and he just liked it straight away, so that was good. But yeah, if you needed guidance, then he'd always give it to you. and it was quite a bit different to just doing whatever you wanted for 17-bit.
I mean, we're definitely going to talk about Alien Breed now that you mentioned that. I mean, obviously, one of your most famous games that you worked on the Amiga at Team 17, and, you know, a series of games as well. And the music you did, the soundtrack on those games, really atmospheric and tense as well. So what kind of memories stand out of working on the Alien Breed games, and how did you make sure that the music matched the game's tone? Kind of tell us about working on those.
So the biggest memory I have is the technical side, actually. So I couldn't write the music I wanted in a normal tracker because it would take too much memory. But actually, that wasn't my first thought, because I only realized that later. So I started writing the music on a different program called SoundMon. And the difference was all the patterns were split up from each other, and they were only 16 notes long. So you could like have one section of 16 note bass line repeating 10 times whilst the other patterns were changing. And you could transpose them as well. So you could have that same 16 note pattern transposed up one or two without taking any space. And you could play the same pattern with a different instrument without taking more space too. So that system actually allowed me to compose Alien Breed because I was playing around with the transposes. If you listen to the music, there's a lot of transposing going along. So yeah, that was my overriding memory, was that actual technical side of getting it working, and that the technical side pushed me into a new creative direction as well.
I remember you mentioning a lot of experimenting with the sounds as well, with like the sound effects, and I think your kitten was involved somewhere in the Alien Breed soundtrack as well.
That's right. So our cat Pandora had just had some newly born kittens, and I just bought my new Akai S950 sampler. So I thought, let's do a test here then and record one of these kittens, a real high pitched squeak. And played it on the keyboard, lovely. And then I think I accidentally fell on the bottom keys of the keyboard like 4 octaves down. And it was like real proper alien-esque alien scream. So I added an explosion to it, and that was actually the aliens dying sound on Alien Breed. But no kittens were actually harmed. So
those aliens were all terrified of as kids. It was actually a kitten.
Yeah, it was actually a kitten. Yeah, Colin the kitten. Actually, yeah.
Do you remember at the time? You know, there was the kind of samples or music on the Amiga, and having them separately. And how did that change? You know, when it became music and samples at the same time.
Yeah, this is a problem. The Amiga only had 4 channels. So you normally either had good music or good sound effects, or neither. So what you could do is something we did on Super Frog. We used 4 channels for the music, but we interrupted the least important channel with sound effects. So I made sure the 4th channel didn't have anything too important on it. And that way, when there's not a sound playing, you get the 4-channel music. When there's a sound playing, it goes down to 3-channel music. And that's kind of the only way of doing it, unfortunately.
I can imagine that added a lot of extra work as well. You know, when other games would just be like, right, you can choose either or, you know.
Yeah, I actually, for most of the Team 17 games, the direction from Team 17, Martin Brown, was that we're just going to focus on sound effects in the game. So if you listen to Project X and Alien Breed, it's all sound effects. Because we wanted the atmosphere, and we didn't want people to have the same tune playing the entire time and eventually turn it off, which is what happens with music in game today. People like replace it with their own tune eventually.
Yeah, and I think that really worked in Alien Breed as well, that kind of isolated just sound and aliens dying and the kind of corridors and stuff like that. Yeah,
we had like a hum sound that we put in the background of the game. Just like a ship hum, and I think that added all the atmosphere that was needed, really.
I'm interested to hear a bit more about Body Blows as well, because as a kid who had an Amiga back then, before we got the Mortal Kombat and the Street Fighter 2 ports to it, I remember Body Blows being kind of regarded as like the ultimate beat 'em up game on the Amiga. And, that soundtrack on there as well, like you said, really kind of dance, rave inspired. I remember a lot of like, woo, sound effects and stuff in there as well. I mean, what memories have you got working on Body Blows?
So I did the title theme to that game, but not the in-game music. So the in-game music was done by Danny, who was the artist. And he gave me the tracks, and I was tasked with making them sound good enough to put in the game. But they were only on 2 channels. You couldn't do much with it. We needed 2 channels for the sound effects. Yeah, it was just a lot of work getting them to sound right, adding little echoes in when needed and so on. But yeah, my work was on the title theme. I think we did have a vocal sample in there.
Yeah.
I would have probably got from something like Peter Gabriel's sample CD.
Didn't it say the name of the game? Didn't it get like Body Blows or something? I've got a vague memory of that.
I remember that now. That was actually me. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah, I always like Body Blows. I know today it doesn't get it doesn't get enough credit, I don't think, in terms of Amiga beat 'em ups, but I was always a fan. Talking about those other Team 17 games, you kind of touched on Super Frog as well, which was a great platformer for the Amiga. I did hear a story that the programmer Andreas and the artist Rico actually came to stay at your house for a while you were working on the soundtrack of that game. What happened there?
Yeah, well, the development wasn't going too well. Everyone was getting a bit bogged down. So Martin decided, okay, let's all come over to England and then go over to Allister's house in Devon, so with my parents' house at the time. They continued work there. So I have a really good memory about this, about Andreas Tadic, who's the main coder. So I needed some stuff doing to the sound driver because it was taking up a lot of CPU in the game. So he decided to rewrite it. So 7 o'clock at night, he decided to start. And when it got to like midnight, I thought, okay, I'm going to have to go to bed now. So I left him to it. Went back upstairs to the computer room in the morning, and he's still there going. Yeah, that's how dedicated he was. Incredible, really.
It's quite interesting as well that you obviously, you're a young guy still working at home, so living with your parents, like you said. And I mean, I imagine in the world of freelance music design for video games, I mean, the traditional kind of 9 to 5 doesn't exist. I mean, how did your parents feel about you kind of making music into like the wee small hours?
Yeah, no, they were very good in that respect. They just let me get on with it, really. Occasionally my dad would come and shout that I was making too much noise and I have to turn it down at night. I don't even remember having headphones for the first 5 years.
And Mortal Kombat was another really fun one as well. What was it like doing the kind of soundtrack for that? And had you played the original arcade?
Yeah, so I got invited to Probe Software to see Fergus McGovern, who was the manager there. And he said, okay, well, we discussed fees first. He just said, right, if you do the music for this game, Alistair, how much do you want? And I remember just saying, it was like some small amount. And he said, well, actually, it was quite good. He just said yes straight away. So I thought, that's good. But anyway, they showed me the arcade machine. It was brilliant. I'd never seen anything like it. But they also had a DAT tape, which is like a digital audio tape, where we had recordings of all the original music and all the sound effects. So I was able to listen to them and translate them to the Amiga. Only thing is, it was one of those projects where they wanted 3 channels for the sound effects. So I had to write a lot of the in-game music in 1 channel, which was pretty impossible. But at least I got to do the title theme in 4 channels.
I loved your title theme of Mortal Kombat on the Amiga. I think it's actually my favourite version of Mortal Kombat's theme music, the one you did in the Amiga.
Oh, yeah, I'm pleased about that. It was just literally listening to the original and trying to copy it. But obviously had to make the sounds as well. By that time, I would have been using my Kursor K2000 synth to get some decent sounds on it too.
Well, you also got to work on several Disney titles as well, including The Jungle Book. You did Toy Story on the Mega Drive, Lion King on the Amiga as well. I mean, what was it like working on those? And were Disney ever did they give feedback? Were they strict on their guidelines? Were they this got to sound a certain way? What do you remember about those?
What I remember about those games is that they were mostly on the Super Nintendo. So I was often selected because I was the only guy that had a Super Nintendo sound driver. In fact, I bought it off David Whittaker before he left to America. That's why I was the only guy that had it. It was very different to the Amiga because now we could play 6 notes at the same time. So it's like, well, in fact, 8, but you might leave 2 channels for sound effects. Toy Story was a great one because it was before the movie even came out.
Right.
And after I'd finished the music, they invited me over to California to see Disneyland and to go to the premiere of the movie. So, and I remember going to the movie, and then they put me in a limousine and took me from the movie to Disneyland.
Full VIP treatment, wow.
Yeah, never had that since, actually.
Yeah.
It's the only time, so it was brilliant.
But at the time you think it'll be like this forever now.
That's right, yeah. Yeah.
Well, by the mid-90s, I mean, you kind of touched on it before with the CD32. But obviously, as you know, the PlayStation stuff came out as well, and CD-ROM became the dominant platform for games, including on the PC as well. I mean, how did you find that switch when you had to do CD-based music? Did you prefer that, or did you prefer working with, mod tracks?
Well, of course, there was this period just after Project X where I created my own CD called Sounds Digital. So I'd already learned the skills, and they went on the back burner for a bit, for a few years, until PlayStation came out, and I had to pick it up again. So I was kind of slightly ahead of the game. Well, bizarrely, I was all ready to do a proper CD soundtrack, and I got a project called Driver on the PlayStation. And it turns out they already had a CD track off a sound library or something for the title theme. And the music they actually wanted from me was tracker tunes, because they couldn't actually stream. They needed the CD to stream graphics, and they couldn't stream any music in game. So what you hear in Driver is actually 8-channel tracker mods. I think the first one where I had to write proper CD music was RollerCoaster Tycoon.
I find that crazy though, that Driver, because Driver sounds really funky and kind of 70s and stuff, and you were doing that in trackers. That's amazing to me.
Yeah, Fast Tracker 2 on the PC. It's just like an upgraded version of Pro Tracker with more channels.
Well, I think people love that soundtrack so much because I know you've done the Driver 21st anniversary as well. You tell us about that and how that went down with a lot of fans from that community.
Yeah, well, people don't realise, but I get a lot more fans of Driver than anything on the Amiga or anything like that. When you compare the plays on Spotify and stuff. So I decided to remake all the tracks because a lot of people have been asking for it. The trouble is, I only had the Driver 2 tracks as XM mods still. So to actually have something to go by to recreate them. So I recreated Driver 2, no problem. But Driver 1, I'd lost it. Now the problem is, the mods on the PlayStation were all compressed down with ADPCM compression, which is completely lossy compression, i.e. you can't get the samples back again very easily, or the mods. But a really clever guy in the demo scene managed to hack it and get the tracks back for me. And I'd spotted that he'd done this on his YouTube channel, and just asked him for the tracks, and he managed to send me back my own XM mods.
Wow. Decompiled.
Decompiled,
yeah.
Exactly. It's amazing. So from there, I was able to export all the tracks one at a time and then start replacing them with modern sounds. I kept some of the original sounds as well, even though they were decompressed ADPCM sounds. It kind of added a certain grit. And
was the idea to kind of rework these sounds and make it much higher quality, but also a bit more of a kind of wider and bigger sound?
Yeah, wider and bigger sound. The sampled guitars, sometimes I had the original CDs that I got them off, which I'd purchased to. Just for I think they were called Funk 1 and Funk 2 or something like that. Yeah, so it was just making it bigger, wider, replacing some instruments like the brass that didn't work well, and replacing the drums, and just making them much more listenable to on a modern system.
And I found it as well really interesting that there's the driver syndicate as well, and the actual main theme was like crowdfunded by the driver community, and you did that. And how was that, working on a new kind of driver title?
I mean, that's a tough one because obviously you've got all these tracks you've already done that people already love because they kind of fell in love with the game first, and then the music goes with it. And so it's quite a big ask to write a new track that they're going to like equally as much. So really, it was just listening very carefully to what I'd done before, because obviously musicians change over the years as well. So I had to go back and listen to my former self. Think, well, what was I actually doing then? Which I did, and came up with something similar, maybe a slightly modern twist to it. They actually crowdfunded the track in the end, because I'd love to do this stuff for free, but they said basically I'm working. This is my only income line, and they actually did a little Kickstarter and raised me a little bit, and to cover my time as well.
The awesome thing is as well that when you buy that digital track as well, you can name your price now on it as well, which is really cool. But then you've also got all the other soundtracks available as well of Driver that you've remastered.
Yeah, all of that. I was able to put them on Spotify, which is nice, stream format, so people can go there and listen to them. But yeah, I do have all the original tracks all remastered, and that one on the same album.
I mean, you've worked on a load of games. I think we were chatting when we were, like you said, we met up in Italy at an event back in the summer, and we were talking. I think, what did you say? You've worked on like over 1,000 games or thereabouts?
It's difficult to say. I think it's 500 or 600 games, but quite a few thousand tunes.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot over the last 30 years or so. I mean, but also you put out quite a few albums as well. I mean, you kind of touched on before with Sounds Digital, and I remember first hearing one of your albums, it was Bang Tick Tick back in 1997. I've got a feeling I've read about that in Amiga format. They might have put one of the tracks, I think the title track, on their cover CD when they started doing those. I remember being really impressed with that. I mean, what's kind of the difference between, obviously you've done a lot of video game soundtracks, but how does the approach change when you're doing an album like Bang Tick Tick? What kind of memories have you got doing that?
Well, my first album was Sounds Digital, and that was like the learning phase, really. Just learning to do stuff. When I got to Bang Tick Tick, I wanted to just make it a bit more together, proper mixing techniques and stuff like that. So yeah, it was quite a good learning process, just trying to get all this stuff together. I had all the latest equipment and stuff, my Kurzweil K2000, this unit called a Soundscape. So then no longer did I have to mix things on tape. I could actually mix them on a piece of hardware. You got a much cleaner sound eventually. After that, I went on to do sort of albums about like retro music. So like the Spectrum Works, we had ZX Spectrum tracks. And well, before that, my Amiga Works album as well. But every time I made an album, you sort of learned something new about mixing and mastering the music and making it sound better. So sort of a progression along the way.
Well, one game that we definitely need to talk about as well, which is actually getting a re-release at the moment for the Switch, is RollerCoaster Tycoon. And I was just wondering, like, what the story was there as well, and what it was like, working with Chris Sawyer and that kind of classic Amiga connection that you guys had.
Well, yeah. I mean, firstly, not a lot of people know that game was written by just Chris Sawyer and one artist and me on the audio. There's nobody else involved other than marketing and stuff like that. Compared to today's games, where I go and see some of these companies today, there's like 50 to 100 people in a room making a game in the same time frame. So it's amazing what he did, and he coded it all by hand in assembler too. So it's kind of unbelievable. I can't remember what the artist was called now, but he is actually dyslexic. But he had this amazing skill with artwork, especially drawing 3D artwork in 2D, if you know what I mean. So yeah, Chris gave me a number of themes to write. He's very clear what they should be. Chris really liked fairground tracks. He'd recorded some, tried to do a number of those. And we had various rides in the game. So I went round a few theme parks to have a listen, like the Dodgems. What sort of music would you expect there? I think we did like a heavy rock thing in the end. So yeah, and the sound effects were interesting. We visited a few theme parks again, recorded some sounds. I actually took one sound, the crowd, from a sound CD that I have. And we've had thousands of people messaging us saying, what was that guy saying in your crowd sample? Because apparently at one point it sounds like he says something right in the middle of it. And of course, I don't know what it was. It was just off a sample CD. But yeah.
You should have just made it up and give everyone a different answer.
I think, I know.
So I think it's really interesting. It must have been quite hard, getting that sound of a theme park for RollerCoaster Tycoon. I think, we've got lots of travelling fairs around our area, and the sound is completely different to, an established theme park. So what was it like, working on that, but also then going from the success of RollerCoaster Tycoon 1 to, RollerCoaster Tycoon 2?
Well, firstly, what you're saying about the sound of it, I think the sound kind of made itself in the end, because we wrote music for all the different rides. But you only heard the rides tunes would actually crossfade with each other as you walked around, so you'd hear all of them at the same time. So it kind of made its own atmosphere.
It's a big sound clash, isn't it, as you walk around?
It is.
One of these places, yeah.
So of course I had no clue what it would sound like. Going to RollerCoaster Tycoon, it was, to be honest, it was more of the same. Chris gave me more different rides to do and specified some styles, and we made a new piece of music for each one. And we had a few new rides in the game as well, where we made some extra sounds. So yeah, it was more of the same. And we did a number of add-on packs as well, where we did similar. We upgraded the music, I think 4 times, something like that. So there's a number of variations on the tunes going around.
Do you find it interesting seeing it, coming out for the Switch and having a revival again, and a lot of people still really into the series and the original way that it was presented as well?
Yeah, I mean, just looking at it, it's amazing how good it looks today still. Such a good game, and it's it's kind of annoying to hear the old music in there at the old quality. I'd have liked to have redone it. Actually, I did. There's a open RollerCoaster Tycoon community which created a new version of the game. So they've taken the old code and just sort of tweaked it and added new stuff. And like Driver, they crowdfunded me to make a new piece of music for it.
Nice.
So I've actually made a new RollerCoaster Tycoon track, which you can go and look on YouTube. Just have a look at Open RollerCoaster Tycoon and you'll find it.
I know in recent years you've actually worked with quite a few small indie studios as well. I mean, how do you find working with them as opposed to the big software houses?
It's a tricky one. So the big software houses tend to have a lot more management structures in place. It can get a bit much. Like who am I actually dealing with? It's like one guy might tell you, oh yeah, I like your piece of music. This is right. I'll go and speak to the team, and then you might get 3 other people with differing opinions. And so I've had those issues with big companies. Little ones, I think they tend to give you your own space and just let you get on with it and maybe trust you a bit more. But it's hard to say because it's not always been like that. I've worked with some big companies where you're just dealing with one guy and he takes on board all the comments, and then you just have to deal with one person and you get really good feedback.
Did you think Power Wash Simulator was going to be as big as it became?
No, I had no clue. Yeah, I mean, who would have thought it? A game where you just go around and clean stuff could do so well. But apparently people find it really relaxing. It's kind of like a colouring book.
Yeah.
So you uncover stuff instead. And yeah, so it was really fun to work on that actually. So I bought myself a power washer, and
did some research.
I did. Well, I had to record the sounds. People don't realise how many sounds there are in a power washer. So you've got all the different nozzles, you see. So you've got 0 degrees, the powerful one, 15 degrees, you got 25, and we go all the way up to a wide soap nozzle at the end. So you've got all those different nozzles you have to record. And then all the surfaces that you can spray.
Yeah.
And of course, trouble is, when you spray them with a real power washer, they sound rubbish. They all sound the same, other than, say, your garage door. It might sound a bit different. So in the end, I got the spray sounds off a normal hose and with a spray attachment. And I sprayed 40 different surfaces. And we add those back into the game to the nozzles. So you get a bit of texture in there. Of course, we also had 4 different types of washer. So you had to do all that stuff 4 times.
I bet your house was gleaming that weekend, was it?
That's right, yeah.
Well, I mean, and something else you did last year that I thought was very cool. You actually recently did the music for an Amiga game called The Mysterious Cassette with a small indie studio. I mean, what was it like doing Amiga game music again, and how did you do that?
That's really tricky, actually. Going back to a tracker now is so hard because, first of all, you've got to get your head around the low quality. Because obviously, since the Amiga, quality's gone up so much. So it's like suddenly back to 8-bit samples. You can't really play any sounds above something like 29 kilohertz. Basically, when your note got too high, you had to make a new sample an octave higher so you could play it. So yeah, they gave me a bit more space because they were doing it on an Amiga with a lot of memory. So that made it easier. And I had all 4 channels to play with. But yeah, I had to just remember what I was doing, but at the same time try and bring something new to it, maybe from the techniques I've learned today about sampling. So all the samples in that game hopefully will sound super clean compared to the old days, and I'll be using much higher sample rates. I know in the old days we'd always sample on like the middle C, which was 16 kilohertz at best, so I was trying to like get it right up to the top, like 28 kilohertz around there. A lot more space, but it sounds good.
Must have been trippy doing an Amiga game again after all these years.
It really was, yeah. To do stuff in 4 channels is really hard.
Well, Allister, it's, like I said, with the amount of games you worked on, we could have easily done another several hours with you, but I appreciate you being very generous with your time. And I'm really pleased that we could have a proper catch up and kind of cover you a bit more in depth than we did in that 20-minute interview back in episode 1 9 years ago. I mean, is there anything else people should be looking out for from you right now, or any way you'd like to direct people to get your music if they want to hear more?
Yeah, you might want to check out a game called The Plucky Squire to start with, which I've been working on. That's out now. I did all the sound design on that, but it's a really clever game. Reminds me of some of the inventiveness we used to get in Amiga demos and stuff, but it actually blends between a 2D game and a 3D game. And inside the 3D game, you actually get 2D as well, which is incredible. You have to see it to believe it. But yeah, so I've had a lot of fun working on that over the last year. Also, I have some music coming out on a game called Beyond the Ice Palace 2. You may remember Beyond the Ice Palace 1 on the Amiga, and before that on the Spectrum and Commodore 64. And they've made a brand new version of it. So this is full-on orchestral music. And what's more, we have David Whittaker's original track redone by me for the game, but in full orchestra. Yeah, look out for that game. Yeah,
planned early 2025, 13th of March, released out on Steam, I see.
Yep, I believe so. But it's a really nice game, yeah.
Awesome. Well, Allister, it's been amazing to have a proper catch-up, and great to see that you're revisiting some of these classics as well, kind of goes full circle. I think that's always really nice to see. And hopefully we'll see you, I know, next year. We're talking before we started recording that it's the Amiga's 40th birthday next year, so hopefully lots of events going on. So hopefully we'll have a chance to catch up at one of those in the new year.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm looking forward to those. Heard a lot about Amiga 40, but I haven't heard much about the events yet that are happening. So yeah, let's look forward to that.
Fantastic. Well, Allister, thanks so much for coming on and being our guest this week. It's been amazing to chat.
Yep. Okay. I'll speak to you soon, hopefully.